We are back and we are joined by Diana Buttu, Palestinian lawyer, former advisor to the negotiating team of the Palestine Liberation Organization. Diana, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So, obviously, it's not humanly possible for us to bring you on and not talk about the horrors. There's no really good news to share at this moment, but I'm hoping that I could get your thoughts on what happened earlier this week with Israeli activists and members of the Israeli government, including members who were a part of the majority coalition, storming Sde Teiman, which is a torture camp in the Negev, to protest the fact that not that Palestinians were being tortured there, but to protest the fact that there were 9 soldiers detained and being questioned about gang raping a Palestinian prisoner. Just take us through the events of earlier this week.
Certainly. Thanks very much for having me. Look, this actually goes back a long time ago, but I'll start with the more immediate, which is since October of 2023. So since October of 2023, Israel took a decision that it was going to transform what was an army base into a torture camp, as you exactly put it. And in this torture camp, Israel has picked up thousands of Palestinians from Gaza and from other places as well in the West Bank, and taken them down to this torture camp that is in the southern part of the country. It's very far away. We actually don't know the full numbers. We're told upwards of 21,000 Palestinians have been abducted in this manner. The vast majority of them are being held without charge, without trial, without even knowing whether they will ever be able to leave this prison camp, this torture camp. Now, since there has been so much overcrowding, we've seen that Israel has actually released a number of Palestinians. And the Palestinians who are being released, and I've spoken to quite a number of them, are all talking about the same system of torture, of being shackled 24 hours a day, being placed in the fetal position, the shackles so tight that some people have had to have their hands and feet amputated, with daily torture, with not being allowed access to water, not being allowed access to have a shower, being forced to eat food that is filled with maggots, and so on. And so with these testimonies that have come out, and they've been coming out quite regularly since October until the current day, one would think that there would have been a great pressure on Israel to end these torture camps. Instead, there's been silence, and it took a long period of time before we even heard a peep from the UN Special Rapporteur on torture to say something. Now, what happened this past week is that we've had a number of investigations that have come out from CNN, from the New York Times, and from the BBC, and now the Washington Post, which is talking about not just torture, but also raping of people who've been held in these prison camps. And this week, the military advocate general decided that he was going to question 9 soldiers who are involved, or are alleged to be involved in this gang rape. Now, just the mere questioning of these soldiers set off a firestorm of riots inside Israel. We had first a number of members of Knesset who then pushed for people within the Israeli right, and it's not just the right wing; it's kind of mainstream now.
That's why I don't even like to say right wing or far right activists, because this is indicative of Israeli society.
It's totally indicative, exactly. So about 200 of them stormed Sde Teiman in the south, and they actually tried to beat the soldiers who were trying to go in and ask for them to be questioned. The 9 alleged individuals barricaded themselves, pepper sprayed the police, and so this massive riot began. From there, after the 9 soldiers were then taken from Sde Teiman in the south, they were then taken to a little bit north of Tel Aviv, where we then saw yet another riot on the part of Israeli activists, including members of Netanyahu's own coalition and within his own party. and with them calling for the release of these 9 and saying that these people are heroes. And so what we're seeing today is exactly a reflection of Israel, which is that they're protesting the right to be able to rape Palestinians. And we even saw within the Israeli Knesset that there was a semi-debate where one member of Knesset said, is it legitimate to be placing objects, be forcing objects into the rectum of Palestinians? And another member of Knesset responded and said, yes, it is. It's totally legitimate. So what we're seeing now is that there's a push to demand the right to be able to rape Palestinians. And it just shows you how far the Israeli society is willing to go without any, because there are no restraints on them. Nobody is saying that things are illegal. And when you constantly position yourself as that everything is justifiable, then you can obviously justify the worst forms of human action. And that's exactly what is happening in Israel today.
Right. And the only reason we should say that these soldiers are even being detained or questioned is because of this international pressure, and because honestly Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government want to continue with the worst of the genocide in Gaza. And this also plays into their efforts to, I think, widen this war, to draw the United States into it, and to make it not about Gaza, but about how Israel is constantly under threat. I guess we could get to that in a little bit because I want to touch more on the conditions here. There have been reports now for months that prisoners were being raped with metal rods, sometimes hot metal rods, burning their anuses to the point where they no longer had control of their faculties. And this is, I think, the detention arm of Israel's categorization of all Palestinian men, or a great majority of them, and boys, as basically combatants. Can you talk about that process and how that has basically midwifed the wholesale detention of up to tens of thousands of Palestinian men? And we don't even know, again, the death toll in Gaza. I saw some doctors were citing a figure as high as 92,000 at this point.
Yes, we don't know the precise toll. The Lancet came out and said that it may be 186,000. Friends who've been in Gaza on medical missions say that the number is probably even higher than that. But in terms of how it is that Israel continues to grab people, kidnap them, detain them, and keep them in prison, it is because Israel has always had this system of what it's kind of a misnomer. They call it administrative detention. It sounds so sanitary, and it's anything but. It's a very violent process in which people are picked up, kidnapped, usually in the middle of the night from their homes, children as young as 13, sometimes even younger, and then held without charge, without trial for a period of 6 months, where that detention can be renewed indefinitely, as long as they see a judge every 6 months. And it's through this system of administrative detention that we've seen roughly 40% of the male population be thrown in prison at one point in time. That's roughly about 20% of the entire Palestinian population has spent time inside of an Israeli prison. Some administrative detention can last upwards of 11 years. A friend of mine spent 11 years of his life under administrative detention, which means without charge and without trial. Now, it's not just that, but it's the process of dehumanization that leads soldiers to be able to do what it is that they want to do with Palestinians. And since November, I've interviewed a number of Palestinians who were kidnapped and then released, and all of them have described similar torture techniques that have been used against them. And one strand that appears throughout all of these testimonies is that they say that the torture that is being meted out by the Israelis, it's unlike torture in the way that people normally think of torture, which, by the way, is illegal either way. But normally when one thinks of torture, they think of torture in order to obtain some sort of information. In this case, there is no information that's being obtained. It's simply to exact revenge and to show superiority. And so we've seen people who have already been convicted, who are serving sentences inside Israeli prisons, who are also being tortured. Again, not because there's an attempt to extract information. Once again, that's illegal, but simply because they're trying to show who it is who is boss. And so the methods that have been used are things that it's even so hard to describe because it's some of the worst. It's the worst behavior of humans that I've ever heard in my life, of raping people, of torturing them. One young man was telling me that at one point his hands were shackled, his legs were shackled, he was put in the fetal position and blindfolded, and around him they drew a circle in chalk, and he was kept in that position for 24 hours a day for days on end. And if he moved in any way, if he spoke up in any way, if he crossed the chalk line in any way, that was a sign that he should be tortured, and he was. And when they torture Palestinians, it's a torture that is witnessed by others. The only time that the blindfold is removed is to be able to see another Palestinian being tortured. And so the testimonies that we've heard of the ways that people are being held, the conditions under which they're being held, is horrifying. And yet it's not even moving the needle inside Israel, because everything is justifiable. And because everything is justifiable, this, of course, is going to continue. And that's why you see the riots that we see.
And in terms of it being broadly accepted, this kind of brutalization towards Palestinians within Israel, I'm struck by the fact that these break-ins by these activists seem to happen quite a bit.
Yes.
Whether it be along the border into Gaza, wow, I don't know, somehow security just seems to fail all the time. And these activists who want to starve everybody in Gaza to death are just able to block all the aid trucks. I mean, what could the people who are manning the border do? Or whether it be the break-in into this torture camp, concentration camp, you could argue. It just seems like, oh, they're able to get in. What could we do? Can you speak to just almost like the tacit acceptance or almost appreciation that so many Israeli guards or people who are a part of the militaristic infrastructure there, their relationship with these activists who are at the front lines of expanding Israel and wanting the genocide to ramp up and continue?
This is a great question, Emma, because I think people often make the mistake of somehow separating the Israeli security services, the police, the prison guards, the soldiers, the army, from ordinary Israelis or from the extreme right wing. They're one and the same. This is a state apparatus, and because it's a state apparatus, it reflects on the state, and it's made up of people who are members of the state. And so because of that, we see a synergy between the two of them. We see that if you look at the West Bank, where the Israeli settlers have been torching Palestinian homes, they've been going after Palestinians and killing them, that instead of the army stopping them, they're actually aiding them. And similarly, as you mentioned, in Gaza, as the aid trucks are supposed to be making their way into Gaza, we've seen that these same security apparatuses are allowing Israelis to set up, get this, bouncy castles in front of these spaces so that they can jump on the bouncy castles, they can eat popcorn, and so that our genocide is their entertainment. And this is allowed to happen. And third, as you put it, as you already said, when it comes to Sde Teiman and the concentration camp or the prison camp that is there, that suddenly they have no means of dealing with crowd control or to stop this riot from happening, but they seem to have those mechanisms when it's Palestinians who are peacefully protesting, who are demanding an end to the genocide and so on. And so the two are so intertwined. These are state. It's a state apparatus, and because it's a state apparatus, it's made of people who are from the state, and it's exactly reflective of Israeli society. So they're not going to go there. They're not going to poke a hole in the bouncy castle. They're not going to tell people to move on and allow the aid trucks in. They're not going to use any method to stop the riots from entering into Sde Teiman or otherwise. They're not going to stop the settlers from from torching Palestinian homes. They're working together rather than opposed to one another.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.